I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. It's so easy to run from help just when we need it the most. And in this episode, I talk about how multiplying disciples seek help. They don't run from it. All this and more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no-regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Thanks for listening to the Rob Skinner Podcast. If you feel like you're benefiting from the program, I'd like to ask you to support it with a gift. Your support enables me to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches, and inspire others to do the same through this podcast. All you need to do is go to the show notes, and there's a link to support the program. Thank you so much. We had such a cool night last night at church. We had a clothing exchange, and I got this idea from Dave Bliley. Dave, thank you so much for this idea. And he talked about this at his lesson that he did at the Climb Conference. It was so powerful. And so every fifth Wednesday of the month, whenever there's a fifth Wednesday in the month, on midweek, we do some type of a service activity in our church. And last night, I borrowed an idea from Dave, and we had a clothing exchange. People, all the members brought tons of their clothes that they were no longer using, and we laid it out on tables. We brought in pizza, and we just had a free shopping period. I mean, it's just like thrift store shopping right in the church. And so people just had a blast. We had pizza. We celebrated a member who just beat cancer, got a cancer-free diagnosis. And then people just went around and took home the clothes that they wanted. And it was such an awesome atmosphere. So we had a great time. And then after that, we came back home and there was a baptism. We had a young professional man get baptized in our pool in the backyard, which was really awesome. So it turned out to be a fantastic day. I hope you're doing great wherever you are around the world. I really appreciate your listening to the Rob Skinner Podcast. It's great to have you here today. I'm continuing a series called Multiplying Disciples, how to become a multiplying disciple. And this episode, I'm talking about the need to seek help, not run from it. I remember listening to a lesson at the 1995 World Mission Seminar in Johannesburg, South Africa. The speaker was sharing about good news from around the world. And one church was lifted up for baptizing hundreds of people. I mean, it's just crazy, the stories. And it became a church of thousands. Over the next few years, I heard conflicting reports from that same church. Then I heard the church leader had been removed. It seems the actual membership was hundreds of people short of what had been reported. When I heard that, I thought, what happened? How could that even be? How could people not know how many people were in their church? And I'm sure that there are a number of reasons for that leadership failure, but I would guess that primary among them would be that the leader or the leadership team didn't seek help early enough and may have run from getting the help that it needed before the problem became really severe. Where are you? This failure goes back to the garden. In Genesis, it says, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to man, where are you? Genesis 3, 6-9. When offered that first temptation, centuries of misery could have been avoided by asking for help and advice from God before chomping into that apple. Once the sin was committed, shame, pride, and fear kept them from turning to the one being who could help them. God had to ask, where are you? This is why we struggle to get help we need from God and others so that we can grow and get back on our feet after a setback. Shame, pride, embarrassment, laziness, and the distorted thinking that comes from these problems forces us into isolation. We delude ourselves into thinking that if we run from the problem, if we ignore it, if we run from God and from other people, the problem will disappear. It'll go away. It rarely does. In the case of that first sin, it quickly compounded and affects us today, thousands of years later. During my final week of my first semester at UC Berkeley, I faced 5 finals in 2 days. On the second day, I arrived at my statistics final after just very little sleep. The previous day, I had rear-ended a car on the way to campus. I showed up to the wrong building for my first test. I ran out of gas on the way home from campus. I spent 2 hours waiting for the tow truck. It seemed God had designed this 2-day gauntlet to humble me and prepare me to become a Christian. The first half of the statistics final that morning was closed book. I had difficulty answering the questions. My only solace was that the second half of the test was open book and open notes. When the professor said start for the second half, I dug through my backpack for my book and my notes. They weren't there. I'd forgotten them in my dorm room. I struggled through that 45 minutes as I watched those around me find the answers they needed in their notes and books. At the end of the test, I went up to the professor and told him I'd forgotten my notes. In his heavily accented Eastern European English, he said, "Why didn't you ask me for help? I would have given you my notes and my book." After he said that, I felt even worse. On top of my massive failure was the knowledge that I could have avoided it by simply asking for help rather than sitting quietly in my shame, embarrassment, and self-hatred. Unfortunately, too many of us repeat my mistake in a multitude of situations. We kick ourselves later for not asking for assistance when it could have made all the difference. Growing disciples grow because they push past the fear, shame, and embarrassment to ask for help. Here's some simple things you can do to accelerate your spiritual growth. First, laugh at failures. View them as simply part of the process of growing. Everyone faces little and big setbacks. Satan wants you to continue thinking that you shouldn't be making mistakes and that, quote unquote, you should know better by now. That kind of thinking will keep you isolated and cut off from life-giving help. Now, I want to talk to you older disciples, older Christians right now. This is where we fall into a trap. We've been disciples for decades, and we're still struggling with a sin that we struggled with maybe as a young Christian. But in our pride, we feel like, I should be beyond this. I shouldn't be struggling with this. I can't be open about this. I can't get help on this issue. That's exactly what Satan wants you to think. Don't place other people on a pedestal. In addition to thinking we shouldn't be making mistakes, is the equally mistaken assumption that others don't struggle with weaknesses like we do. Have you ever talked to an older person in the fellowship and felt like you couldn't talk to them about the struggles you might be facing, like lust, anger, or coarse language? Why? It's because it's hard to conceive of that kindly, older, sweet person ever having an impure thought. And yet they were young once and face the exact same trials you're going through. Go to seminars and conferences. Whatever you want to grow in, there's a conference that'll help you to get there. It might be a live conference or an online webinar, but there is a way to learn from other people. One growth expert that I read recommends we spend 3% of our income on personal development and seminars. Too often I see people staying home, stuck in their rut, because they don't want to spend their money on growth. It just blows my mind. It's like, I don't have the money. I don't want to go. They stay home and they stay the same. All because they don't want to invest in themselves. Listen, you are so awesome. Why wouldn't you want to spend money on yourself? What a waste. You don't know what you're missing. I started a podcast in 2020 and recorded over 250 podcasts. Earlier this year, I felt like I needed to take my skills to a new level. I saw my listenership decline, and I didn't know why. I went to a podcasting conference in Los Angeles a couple months ago. What I learned there just blew me away. The first thing I learned was that everyone else has also been seeing their listening downloads decline by as much as 60%. And it had nothing to do with the podcaster's performance. The decline was due to an algorithm adjustment Apple had made on their podcast platform. I'll tell you what, I was so happy and relieved to know that I wasn't just tanking because of doing a bad job on my podcast. Prior to going to the conference, I had thoughts of shutting down this podcast. On top of that, the classes that were taught gave me at least 5 great ideas for taking my podcast to the next level. I never would have known those things by sitting at home feeling sorry for myself. Face down your weaknesses. I've worked out in a gym ever since college. Arnold Schwarzenegger is one of my inspirations. I know Arnold's not a believer, but he still inspires me. However, I'm still not much stronger than I was 20 or 30 years ago. Then I recently asked for help from a physical trainer. I actually shared my faith with him and then asked him to train me. I've seen tons of progress in the past 5 months. Why? He's making me do things in the gym that either I didn't know to do or that I didn't want to do. He helps me break my mental and physical barriers. Prior to hiring him, I would follow the same comfortable routine I had followed for decades. He shattered that cozy pattern. If you want to grow in any area, take a look at your weak areas and get help on them. Any area that you have experienced a plateau or lack of progress in is an area that could benefit from outside help. What else can you do? Read books. I've said it before, and I'll repeat it till I die. Learn from others how they overcame the challenges you're facing right now. Whatever you're facing has most likely been written about, talked about, or discussed in detail. I love the story of how Elon Musk started his rocket company, SpaceX. With no prior knowledge of rocket science, Musk started reading books on the subject and asked questions of the rocket scientists that he'd hired to start his company. It only took him 2 years to become an expert in the field and get his own company off the ground, literally. It's pretty amazing. I mean, we talk about and we laugh about how, hey, it's not rocket science. This guy learned rocket science from reading a book. What can you learn from reading? There's nothing you can't grow in, become, or achieve. I don't care how old you are or how young you are. I don't care the excuses you're making right now in your mind. All you need is the willingness to ask for help, to suppress Satan's attempts to shame you into silence, and read, watch, or listen to those willing to help you get where you want to be, a multiplying disciple. Thanks for listening. Here's how you can help support the program. First of all, share your favorite episodes with your friends. Let people know about it. It's just so cool. I hear people saying, hey, someone told me about this. If you got an episode that you like, share it with somebody. Just go there and just share the link with somebody. Secondly, read and review one of my books, either How to Plant and Grow a Church or Courage, How to Make This Life Count. And finally, you can support the program with a gift today. The link is in the show notes because my goal is to inspire you to make this life count, live a no regrets life, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day and make this life count.